Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory in for Hashtag the U. It's Friday, December 30th. This is Africa 54.
International football icon Pele has died at the age of 82. We'll take a look at the life and legacy of the three-time World Cup champion. As 2022 comes to a close, we'll review Africa's top stories, from conflicts and hunger to politics and sports. And in our final Friday entertainment report for the year, Heather Maxwell shares a live concert performance of Ladysmith Black Mambazo. This and more on today's Africa 54.
International football legend Pele has died at the age of 82 after battling cancer and cardiac problems the past year. Over the course of his legendary career, the Brazilian who led his national team to an unprecedented 3 World Cup titles became known as one of the sport's greatest players. VOA's Robert Raphael has more on the life of the international icon.
The man who would become known simply as Pele dazzled fans on the World Cup stage for Brazil and in club games and international tours with his team, the Santos Football Club, before generating enthusiasm for the game in the United States, joining the New York Cosmos at the end of his career. He was born Edson Arantes do Nascimento on October 23, 1940. As a child, he gained acclaim for his soccer skills and signed with Santos at the age of 15. By 16, Pele was part of Brazil's national team, and in 1958, he made his World Cup debut at age 17. He is the youngest player to ever score in the Men's World Cup, ending up with 6 goals in the tournament in Sweden. Pele's 2 goals in the final match helped Brazil capture the 1958 title, and he led his team to 2 more World Cup titles in 1962 and 1970. With an international career that included 77 goals in 92 official matches, Pele was named FIFA's co-player of the 20th century, along with Argentina's Diego Maradona. In 1975, Pele joined the New York Cosmos of the North American Soccer League and played 3 seasons there. In 2015, Pele reflected on his life at the top of the game.
I think the secret to success is to respect people, to be prepared always, and then never think you are the best.
Thursday, France star Kylian Mbappe said that Pele's legacy will never be forgotten. And Pele's daughter, Kelly Nascimento, remembered her father, writing on Instagram in Portuguese, quote, "Everything we are is because of you. We love you infinitely. Rest in peace." Robert Raphael, VOA News, Washington.
Well, for more on Pele's legacy, I'm joined by João José Santa Rita, a VOA Portuguese reporter. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, growing up in Kenya, every young boy wanted to be Pele in every village, in every town. What made him so popular? What made him so famous globally?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects to it. There's this aspect of the game, and as you saw there, he was the only player who won 3 World Cups, 58, 62, and 70. And he was a very affable man. He was a man who didn't have a big ego. And he became a sort of, in Brazil first, he became a symbol of national unity. Football is a religion almost in Brazil. And here was a man who came from an extreme poor background. He practically had no education. He had 4 years of schooling, who became a big star, but never had a big ego. He became a symbol of Brazil's power in soccer. And this was an image of national unity that still is today. Worldwide, the same thing. Here is a man of a poor background who's an incredible athlete and rises to the top of fame, and yet he's always an affable man who talks to you, and he goes around as an ambassador to football. Another thing I must say that people forget is that Pele was also a politician. He was a member of a Brazilian government, of President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, was Minister of Culture and Sports, was a singer, he recorded music, and was also an actor. He was in a movie with Michael Caine, which probably many people don't know about it. I don't know if it was a good movie, but anyway, he was there. So he covered all the aspects. Another thing I want to tell you is that he's classified as the biggest or the best world football player in the world. You know, he never won the Ballon d'Or, the golden ball. They gave it to him when he was already retired.
Very quickly, do you think it changed the way we expect soccer to be played? Everybody has always said, wow, there is something about the way he played that is so different than any other soccer player.
Yeah, I think he brought two things. He brought skill, but Pele was also a man of incredible physical power. It was difficult to take the ball away from him. I mean, if you look at him and if you look at Messi, these are two different players, although very technically gifted, or Maradona. But Pele, he brought he made, and that's where the Brazilians get the name, o jogo bonito, the beautiful game. Yeah. He brought that technicality and the power at the same time. So he really introduced something new to football.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing those insights with us, João. João Santa Rita is a VOA Portuguese reporter. He joined us here. Thank you. Now, human rights groups say Tunisians are leaving their homeland in numbers not seen since the country's revolution 12 years ago. The exodus reflects a growing despair over a democratic experiment that has founded and hope for a better future in Europe. Lisa Bryant reports from the southern Tunisian fishing city of Zassis, an immigration hotspot and graveyard.
Walid Zridat left home one Wednesday in September and never came back.
We didn't get a call from him on Thursday saying, "Dad, I've arrived in Lampedusa." Same thing Friday.
Father Salim Zridat discovered his son was one of 18 young Tunisians on a boat bound for Italy that disappeared off the coast of Zarzis. Local fishermen and the Coast Guard eventually found 8 bodies, but never Walid's.
We went out from 7 in the morning to 8 at night looking. We went everywhere. We didn't find the bodies in the sea, but on land.
Families and supporters of the missing have staged protests and this ongoing sit-in denouncing what they claim was the state's slow rescue response. President Kais Saied has called for answers, but that won't bring back Walid Zridat.
He would always talk about going to Italy. All the boys here do. This generation, everyone will leave because there's nothing here.
We've had record migration numbers this year. We now have 2 migration routes via Italy and Serbia.
Ala Talbi's group advocates for migrants' rights. It estimates nearly 40,000 Tunisians have arrived in Europe this year. Nearly 30,000 were intercepted by Tunisian coast guards. Hundreds of others are dead or missing.
Migration today isn't just a question of young people with college degrees or the unemployed. It increasingly affects everyone. All kinds of people want to leave Tunisia.
Behind those spiking numbers is a country soured by post-revolution politics that failed to deliver better lives. Tunisia's unemployment stands at nearly 20%. Only 1 in 10 eligible voters participated in elections this month that were boycotted by most political parties. Many Tunisians are leaving. Even Balsam Hnid, who was deported from France this year as an illegal migrant. His cousin and best friend count among Zarzis's victims.
There's a black future here in Tunisia. That's why I'm thinking of trying to return to France, to Europe, even to China, anywhere but Tunisia.
Zarzis is also a stopover for sub-Saharan Africans, similarly seeking a better life. They work informal jobs here to earn money for their clandestine passage to Europe.
It's not easy, but you just have to do it just to succeed, achieve what you want in life.
But the fate of Walid and other would-be migrants here underscores the enormous risks of setting sail, and for some, there's no second chance. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Zarzis, Tunisia.
Well, we are counting down to the end of 2022. It was truly an eventful year in Africa. So today we want to take a moment and review some of the stories that dominated the headlines across the continent. For that, I'm joined in studio by my colleague Salim Solomon, VOA's News Center multimedia editor, and Jackson Vunganyi, host of VOA's Red Carpet TV program. And now to both of you, thank you very much. And I'm happy to be with you after such a long time.
Yes.
Okay, now let's start with, there were so many things that happened, but we want to just look at some of those. And I think one of the biggest stories was the Ethiopia-Tigray conflict. In terms of where we are at the moment, looking at how it was covered, Salim, what would you say?
In Ethiopia, the peace negotiation between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the federal government is kind of materializing as we see if it continues like what's happening in the past 2 weeks. But it's very fragile. It's very fragile in a sense that, people are still trying to see how far it will hold. We saw the families reuniting after a complete blackout in Tigray for quite some time. Almost reminiscent of what happened in 2018 when the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia happened. And so we'll see. But what remains right now is that, you will see, hopefully, we'll see if, the peace will hold. And also, there are millions displaced. And so, and also there are millions of communities basically facing hunger and things like that because of the remnant.
But it's positive. You could say at least we've started seeing food going in.
Right, absolutely, Vincent. When this war started, the conflict started a couple of over 2 years ago. We say there can never be any winners here, and 2 years later, many thousands of people dead. It's good that we're ending the year with this what the UN called a de facto blockade, essentially ending with this flight to Mekelle this week. People opening up spaces, international humanitarian aid flowing into Mekelle and other parts of Tigray. So we're ending the year on a positive note, really, and hopefully that this peace agreement will hold.
Yeah, we want this peace. We want this peace. But let's move on to the next story that was really big on the continent, was to do with hunger and a drought in parts of Africa. It was the Horn of Africa area, Kenya, and you were all the way to West Africa.
Right.
Salim.
Right. Unfortunately, 2022 has been horrible. You have the aftermath of a global pandemic that has impacted not just the continent, but the world. As countries were still recovering from that, you have that, and then you have cyclical, climate issue that impacts the Horn of Africa plus other regions, and then you have economic, issues because of the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. And so the combination of all these three factors, conflict, climate change, has really exacerbated the existing problems that these countries have in the Horn, especially Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia. There are people in really dire situation. The UNICEF just a week ago or so was saying around 20.2 million children are now facing a threat of severe hunger, the worst kind of devastation.
About 2 rainy seasons or even 4, I think. But Jackson, that also became a conversation at the COP27, which happened in Africa.
Absolutely. A historical event happened Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. I think one of the positive things, actually the most positive thing about that was the loss and damage agreement, where richer nations agree now to pay Africa or the poorer nations for some of the impact of climate change, including the droughts that we've seen that have been affecting the region, the Horn of Africa, for these past couple of years. We've had a very difficult couple of years in terms of climate change on the continent. I think COP27, instead of these people just going in for meetings and talking, having discussions, I think this time around we had something that's more tangible in terms of helping the continent.
Let's hope somebody pays attention. Now, turn to politics. You know, this is one thing that really frustrates people on the continent. But we witnessed some elections, but also some coups.
Right.
Salam, let's start with the elections. What stood out, and which elections?
You know, the elections, and we've seen you cover in Kenya. I mean, it was quite a surprise, actually, to see the result of the elections in Kenya. You were up front, really following it. So it was surprising, but you know, you see democratic processes, very positive democratic processes, basically implemented and playing out on the continent. Very positive.
Very positive.
Yeah.
But then,
right. No, Vincent, listen, it's 2022. We should not be talking about coup d'etats in Africa anymore. Listen, that should be past us right now. Yeah. But again, the encouraging thing is in Angola, Kenya, we've seen these elections, peaceful elections. We always have these doomsday conspiracies about elections in Kenya each time it happens. But again, they have proved us wrong, and we saw a peaceful transition of power. A ruling party losing, you know, I don't know whether you'd call it a ruling party, but a ruling coalition really losing, and you know, people accept the results, and life moves on.
It's very encouraging.
Right. I want to mention about the trend that we saw in West Africa. You know, you have Guinea, 2 coups in Burkina Faso, these movements that are very troubling. And because when you see these coup leaders come into power, they have trouble in maintaining, because they use heavy-handed tactics to maintain power. And so you see this trend in West Africa, and we saw in Sao Tome, in Mali, so many places Guinea-Bissau. And the problem is that other African countries look at each other to see how these things play out, and you have coups and counter coups, 1 or 2 of them, and it's very troublesome to see the trend. And there are other foreign powers at play that benefit from instability
on the continent,
at the expense of African people. But very quickly, 2 events took place outside of the African continent, but were very important to the continent.
Right.
The U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. Let's start with that, and you covered
the
part of that.
Africa Leadership Summit, yes, a very important summit. The U.S. plans to spend $55 billion over the next 3 years on the African continent, kind of countering the impact of Chinese loans on the continent. The soft power we always talk about. But the one thing that I have not seen is I've not had any African leaders actually sitting with their people since they left Washington, D.C. to talk about what came out of the meeting. So those are some of the things where, you know, when you're talking about your core constituency and their needs, what kind of conversations are you having? Instead of just coming to Washington, D.C., having these grand meetings, negotiations, discussions, and going back home and then, you know, keeping quiet, what are you talking to about with your people about?
Right. I would like to also mention, you know, when we were talking about conflicts in Africa, the silver lining, I would say, in 2022 is that, you know, the long sought for African solutions for African problems, you see it materializing. You know, you have Ethiopia, the African Union really stepping in to mediate. You have, even in the DRC, where the East African community coming in, stepping in, making, like, you know, these African organizations stepping in, trying to make, to end conflict. But coming back to the U.S. Africa, my main takeaway was when this administration, President Joe Biden said, you know, Africa belongs on the table, pushing for the G20, Africa to be included in that. I think it's very promising, and also the recurring usage of the word partnership. And you see that it's very important to see. Yes, there were so many takeaways, so many signing of deals.
You know, it's like we're not here to lecture you. We want to work with you.
Absolutely. For me, the most important part was this push towards engaging with the African diaspora. The African diaspora is also a very core constituency in terms of sending remittances back home. We send way more money than foreign aid and other types of trade. So engaging with the diaspora, I think, is quite important, and I'm glad that they actually, you know, brought that to light.
Certain countries, like, you know, the Jewish diaspora, the Asian countries have very powerful diaspora communities. But another event, and you covered big time, that is the World Cup.
Oh yes, this was Africa's year at the World Cup. Did you watch the World Cup?
Well, I was watching it from here.
But listen, Vincent, this was Africa's year, no doubt. Morocco made us proud. You know, I was in Ghana covering it from Ghana. The Black Stars, the national team, were representing in Qatar. But overall, I think, you know, this once every 4 years event, for the first time, Africa really outdid itself. And, you know, going forward, I think we have...
Morocco was literally smelling the World Cup. It was like right there.
I was actually really energized watching Jackson just,
doing his thing.
My main takeaway is, when we saw Tim Weah, son of George Weah, scoring for the U.S. I felt even locally here from Washington, D.C., we saw a lot of prominent newspapers really doing a feature, giving Africa its
rightful place.
Rightful place.
Africa was at the World Cup all the way to the final.
Right.
I mean, I kept calling France the other African team.
Yeah, it was the other African team.
And that's my one main takeaway watching all the way from here. Another one is to see how many African coaches are taking their rightful places. And so that was
all the teams were coached by Africans.
Exactly.
And you know what? I wish we had all the time. But again, talking about Weah's son, I was just happy to see a son of a president who works.
Right.
He works. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Vincent. It's such a pleasure. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. And what a year it was. I want to thank both of you for sharing this last Friday of 2022 with me. That's Salim Solomon, a VOA multimedia editor, and Jackson Vunganyi is the host of VOA's Red Carpet. Well, now, as the clock ticks closer to 2023, we spoke to people in Accra, Ghana, about what they considered most significant to them in 2022.
This year, I consider a wonderful parliament that Ghana has had. Because with all the twists and turns that we've had, I think that they sometimes, break apart and then reunite to give us a very considerate and focused parliament. Example is the finance minister's issue. Initially, they were torn apart, but I realized that at a point in time, they all came back and then realized that Ghana is more important than they sitting there and then redividing themselves. And I can see that they have reconnected themselves and thinking about the best that we can have. So I think that in the coming years, we'll have the best of Ghana. Anybody ruling us has to consider parliament and then make sure that whatever they decide will come into place for all of us to enjoy.
For me, I consider the increment of items on the market. That is my most worried 2022 this year. I don't have any hope that things will get better because the way things are going, I don't have the faith in this government unless God has to rescue us, honestly speaking.
Well, some Ghanaians there speaking to VOA about the year 2022 that is about just to end. Now, in other news, eyewitnesses say Eritrean soldiers are pulling out of the towns of Shire and Aksum in northern Ethiopia's Tigray region. Eritrean forces fought alongside Ethiopia's military during a 2-year war in Tigray. The trial resumed in Mali on Friday of 46 Ivorian troops whose detention on July 10th has sparked a diplomatic dispute between both countries. Ivory Coast and the United Nations says the troops were flown in to provide routine backup security for the German contingent of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. And in Algeria, a defense lawyer says prominent journalist Isane El-Kadi is behind bars and the offices of his website and radio station have been shut down based on accusations that they threatened state security. Well, and in our final Friday entertainment report of 2022, Heather Maxwell, host of VOA's Music Time in Africa, brings us a yet unseen live performance of one of the highlights of her program's coverage this year. Heather, what do you have for us today?
Yes, that's right, Vincent. You know, out of all of the live shows I filmed this year, I have to say that Ladysmith Black Mambazo was the most breathtaking and emotional performance of all. So to cap off the year on a high note, enjoy this live performance filmed right here in Washington, D.C.
Bayatele abadlali kahle abafana benza ukhuza wenompempe bayadelela abadlali kahle umaso singadlala kanje angeke kulunga angeke kulunga umasong singadlala kanje hayi angeke kulunge hayi angeke kulunge abafana benza kodwa abafana benza bayadelela abadlali kahle abafana benza ukhuza bayadelela abadlali kahle uma sonke singadlala kanje angeke kulunge hayi angeke kulunge uma sonke singadlala kanje angeke kulunge hayi angeke kulunge awu bakhuzeni bayakana awu bakhuzeni bayakana awu bakhuzeni bayakana awu bakhuzeni bayayona yonke lento bazoyona yonke lento bayayona yonke lento bazoyona yonke lento bayayona yonke lento bazoyona yonke lento bakhuzeni bayakanga bakhuzeni bakhuzeni labo bantu bakhuzeni bakhipheleni ngaphandle bakhusheleni emnyango bakhipheleni ngaphandle bakhusheleni emnyango bakhipheleni ngaphandle.
All right, they were just getting warmed up with those high kicks there. Happy New Year to everybody. Vincent, back to you.
Well, Heather, thank you very much for joining us today. Remember to join Heather every Friday for the entertainment segment. And that's our show for today. We leave it right there. And just remember to watch our program on our website at viewafrica.com. And from all of us here, we wish you a wonderful weekend and a great, great year ahead. We'll leave you with more of Lady Smith, Black Mambazo.
Awu bakhuzeni bo bakhuzeni awu bakhuzeni awu bakhuzeni awu bakhuzeni bakhipheleni ngaphandle baphusheleni emnyango bakhipheleni ngaphandle baphusheleni emnyango bakhuzeni labo bantu bakhuzeni bayaka bakhuzeni labo bakhuzeni bayaka bakhuzeni labo bakhuzeni bayaka